Hey everyone, hope you're doing great. Welcome back to my channel. In today's video, we'll dive into what if Deku merged with his future self. Smash that subscribe button, and be sure to peek at the description below. Let's begin. The air in the unforeseen simulation joint was a toxic cocktail of dust, ozone, and fear. For Izuku Midoriya, it was the taste of his own inadequacy. Every breath was a ragged gasp, his lungs burning, his heart hammering a frantic rhythm against his ribs like a trapped bird. Before him, the plaza was a tableau of absolute horror. His teacher, Shota Aizawa, lay broken and bleeding, his head ground into the concrete by a monster that defied reason, the Nomu. It was a grotesque parody of life, a hulking mass of midnight dark muscle, its brain exposed in a gruesome mockery of a cranium. It stood utterly still, a living statue of death, awaiting the command of its master. And that master, the man-child with hands adorning his body, was practically vibrating with petulant glee, Tamayara Shigaraki. His voice was a rasp, dry and cracking like old parchment. "You really are cool, Eraserhead." He let out a small, chilling giggle, but his attention, red eyes burning with manic intensity, shifted from the fallen hero. It swept over to the water's edge, where Tsuyu Azuri and Minoru Mineta were frozen in terror, their faces pale masks of disbelief. Izuku's own fear was a cold, solid thing in his gut. He was hiding, crouched behind a fountain's decorative shrubbery, every instinct screaming at him to stay down, to wait. All Might was coming. He had to be, but the seconds stretched into an eternity, and the only sound was Shigaraki's delighted, scratchy monologue. "But you know, hero." Shigaraki's head tilted, a jerky, bird-like motion. "Our master is getting impatient. The big boss is waiting. So, let's clear the stage a little. Let's break his spirit before he even gets here." His gaze fixed on Tsuyu. "Noma. Get the girl. The one with the frog quirk. Let's see what her insides look like." Time stopped. It wasn't a metaphorical stop. For Izuku, the world seemed to lurch, the sounds of Shigaraki's voice echoing as if in a vast, empty cavern. He saw the Noma's head snap towards Tsuyu. He saw the flicker of comprehension in her wide, dark eyes, not just fear, but the dawning, soul-crushing certainty of her own death. He saw Mineta's face crumple, tears and snot streaking through the dirt, as he became paralyzed by a terror so profound it was almost sublime. Aizawa-sensei had risked everything. He had fought until his body gave out. And for what? So his students could be slaughtered like cattle? No. The thought wasn't a product of analysis or strategy. It was a primal, foundational rejection of reality. It was the same impulse that had sent him running towards the sludge villain to save Kaken, a lifetime ago. My body just moved, his legs coiled, muscles screaming in protest. One for all, the sacred torch passed to him by the symbol of peace, was a volatile, untamed sun roaring within his limbs. He knew the cost. Using it meant breaking himself. A single, desperate punch would shatter his arm, rendering him useless. But what was a broken arm compared to a life? He exploded from his hiding spot, a green blur of misplaced courage. The wind pressure from his own movement was a physical blow, tearing at his uniform. He saw the Nomu's arm, a pillar of muscle and sinew, blurring as it reached for Tsuyu. He was too slow. The realization hit him with the force of a physical impact. He was fast, faster than he had ever been. But the Nomu was a different order of being. It moved with the impossible, instantaneous speed of a video game glitch. He could see the trajectory of his own body, the arc of his jump. He wouldn't make it. He wouldn't even be a distraction. He was just a gnat flying into a hurricane. The Nomu's attention, momentarily diverted by his sudden appearance, flickered back to him. Its dead, vacant eyes locked onto his. Shigaraki's voice cut through the air, laced with annoyed curiosity. "Oh, another party member wants to play? Fine. Kill the loud one first." The monster's fist, a wrecking ball of flesh and bone, changed its target. It was no longer reaching for Tsuyu. It was coming for him. The air compressed in front of it, a visible shockwave. The sheer pressure made his eyes water and his ears pop. It was a fist that could pulverize concrete, a fist that had just disabled the top pro hero, and it was going to hit him in the face. In that final, stretched out microsecond, Izuku Midoriya saw his death. It was ugly and pointless. He would die, his friends would die, and All Might would arrive to a scene of carnage, a failure he would carry for the rest of his life. I'm sorry, Mom. I'm sorry, All Might. I couldn't even be a good decoy. And then, the universe cracked. It began not as a sight, but as a sound, a low, resonant hum that vibrated in the marrow of his bones. The world, which had been moving in a horrifying, slow-motion ballet, froze solid. The gnome's fist hung in the air a mere inch from his nose, the knuckles like pitted stone. A drop of sweat on Tsuyu's temple was a perfect, crystalline sphere. Shigaraki's mouth was open in a silent, gleeful snarl. The air itself felt like glass. Nothing moved. Nothing breathed. Then came the lightning. It wasn't the chaotic, barely controlled crackle of green energy he was used to. This was different. A torrent of emerald light, sharp and defined as shattered jade, erupted from his core. It didn't explode outward. It coiled inward, wrapping around his limbs like glowing serpents, sinking into his skin. It didn't feel like his power. It felt ancient. It felt tired. And it was furious. With the lightning came the memories. They weren't his own. They slammed into his consciousness like a tidal wave, a deluge of pain, grief, and failure from a future that screamed its existence into his mind. A flash of fire. The smell of burning books and plastic. The UA barrier, the pride of Hero Society, was a crumbling ruin of shattered glass and twisted metal. Gigantomachia's roar was the thunder of the apocalypse. The sight of Ochiko's glove, spattered with blood, lying half-buried in rubble. Her voice not her cheerful greeting, but a final, choked scream that echoed in his soul. Todoroki, his face a mask of grim determination, unleashing a torrent of fire and ice, a beautiful, deadly aurora against the sky choked with black smoke. And then a flash of purple and black, a warped gate, and a hand reaching through. Bakugo. Kaken. His eternal rival, his childhood friend, standing back to back with him. Not shouting, not angry, but a quiet, desperate command in his voice. Don't you dare die, Deku. Then the sound of an explosion, too close, and the phantom sensation of a searing pain that wasn't his own. All Might, gaunt and skeletal, his body withered but his eyes still burning with that indomitable fire. He was looking at Izuku, a sad, proud smile on his face. You were worthy, my boy. You were always worthy. Then the cough, the spray of blood, the light in his eyes finally dimming. Rain. So much rain. Standing in a graveyard with so many names of his friends, his teachers. Ida. Kirishima. Yaoyorozu. Jiro. The list went on, a litany of ghosts he had failed to save. And then the final battle. A city in ruins. A sky turned blood red. A man in a pristine white suit and a terrifying, skull-like life support mask, floating above the devastation. All for one. You see, Ninth, the voice was calm, patronizing, dripping with centuries of malice. It was always inevitable. The will to take is so much stronger than the will to give. Your idealism was a flaw, not a feature. The memories weren't just seen, they were felt. The phantom agony of 100 broken bones, the crushing weight of a collapsing building, the icy chill of loss that froze his heart, the searing, white-hot burn of rage, and the bone-deep, soul-crushing exhaustion of a war that had been lost from the very beginning. This was the life of another Izuku Midoriya. A man who had inherited One for All, fought with everything he had, and watched his entire world burn down around him. A man who had failed. In the heart of that temporal maelstrom, a final memory, a final sensation, rose above the others. The feeling of unimaginable power surging through a broken, dying body. A final, desperate gambit. A quirk dormant within One for All for generations, the fourth user's danger sense, twisted and overclocked, not to sense danger, but to scream a warning back through the very fabric of time, to send a soul, a consciousness, a ghost of a hero, back to the point where it all went wrong. A voice, his own but not, rasped through the hurricane in his mind. It was a voice worn thin by grief and hardened by countless battles. Not again. The thought was a physical force. I won't let them die. I won't watch it all burn again. The future consciousness, A specter of pain and regret slammed into his own. It was a violent, agonizing collision. His youthful idealism, his bright-eyed hope, his simple, desperate need to save people with a smile, it all crashed against the wall of pure, cynical pragmatism and grim resolve. The boy who wanted to be a hero met the man who had failed to be one. For an infinitesimal moment, two souls occupied the same space, warring for control of a single, terrified heart. Then they merged, and time, with a sound like a cracking whip, snapped back into motion. The gnome's fist continued its journey. 1 inch. But the body it was aimed at was no longer there. Izuku, or the being that was now Izuku, didn't think. It acted. The foreign, ancient lightning that had been coiling in his limbs now settled, humming with controlled power. It wasn't the chaotic self-destruction he knew. It was a perfectly calibrated sheath of energy, enveloping his body in a gentle, green aura. A technique he had no name for, a sensation he couldn't comprehend. It was a full cowl. His right leg, now wreathed in that stable, humming power, pushed off the ground. The movement wasn't the desperate leap of a boy. It was the explosive, hyper-efficient motion of a veteran. The world didn't slow down, he sped up. But he wasn't just moving himself. As he pivoted, a flicker of something new, something alien, erupted from his right arm. It wasn't light. It was a tendril of pure, solid darkness, an inky lash that shot out with serpentine speed. It wrapped securely around Tsuyu Ajui's waist. He felt a phantom memory jolt through him, using this power, this black whip, to swing between shattered skyscrapers, to bind villains, to save fallen comrades. With a grunt that was equal parts exertion and a ghost of long-practiced skill, he yanked. Tsuyu let out a startled carol. As she was unceremoniously ripped from her spot, a blur of green and white sailing through the air, the gnome's fist smashed into the spot where she had been standing an instant before, pulverizing the flagstones into a cloud of gray dust. He landed, feet planted firmly on the ground, with Tsuyu held securely in one arm, her body trembling. He gently set her down beside a stunned Mineta. The entire sequence, the dodge, the manifestation of a new quirk, the rescue, had taken less than a second. He turned. The gnome stood in the crater of its own making, its head slowly swiveling to face him, a flicker of what might have been confusion in its lifeless eyes. Shigaraki's jaw was slack. The hand on his face seemed to droop. His scratchy voice was no longer gleeful. It was laced with a new, unfamiliar emotion, disbelief. What was that? That wasn't your quirk. You're just a strong punch kid. What was that black stuff? How did you move so fast? He started scratching his neck, his agitation mounting, the skin flaking away under his frantic nails. Cheater. You're a cheater. That's a cheat code. Izuku didn't answer. He didn't have the words. His mind was a maelstrom of 2 lifetimes, a cacophony of a boy's terror and a man's weariness. But his body knew what to do. His stance shifted. His feet were shoulder-width apart, his center of gravity low. It was a fighting stance he'd never been taught, but it felt as natural as breathing. He looked at the Nomu. He wasn't seeing a terrifying, unknown monster anymore. He was seeing a biological weapon. He was seeing the exposed brain, the shock absorption quirk, the muscular augmentation. The memories of the future self supplied a full tactical breakdown in an instant. Shock absorption doesn't nullify. It disperses. Overwhelm it. The brain is the weak point. It has no higher-level cognitive function. It only follows orders. The fear was still there, a cold knot in the pit of the boy's stomach. But it was blanketed by a thick, heavy layer of something else. A profound, soul-deep exhaustion. The man inside him had fought 100 Nomu, 1,000 villains. This was just one more. A ghost from a battle already fought and lost. He met the Nomu's dead stare, and the eyes it saw were not the wide, expressive, tear-filled emeralds of Izuku Midoriya. They were older. They were chips of ancient jade, haunted by the ghosts of a fallen world, burning with a cold, grim light. From the edge of the plaza, Tsuyu stared, her heart pounding. The boy who had just saved her was the same boy from her class, Midoriya. But he wasn't. The way he stood, the way he held himself, it was different. The look in his eyes, it was the look of their teacher, of a pro-hero who had seen too much. It didn't belong on the face of a 16-year-old boy. "Noma!" Shigaraki shrieked, his voice cracking with rage. "Kill him! I don't care how! Kill him!" The monster let out a soundless roar and charged. It crossed the plaza in a blink, its fists raised, ready to pummel this impudent child into dust. Izuku, the new Izuku, didn't flinch. The green lightning of full call flared brighter, an angry corona. He raised his arms, ready to what? The boy didn't know. The man knew a dozen different countermoves, a dozen ways to use the Noma's momentum against it. But this body was weak. Untrained. The power output was a fraction of what it should be. The clash of knowledge and physical limitation was a jarring dissonance, a flicker of hesitation. A fatal flaw in the merged machine, and in that moment of hesitation, a shadow fell over the entrance of the USJ. The great metal doors buckled inward, then burst from their hinges, sent flying by an impossible force. A figure stood silhouetted against the bright, unfiltered daylight, a giant of a man with two distinct tufts of hair that looked like rabbit ears. His voice was a booming thunderclap that rolled across the plaza, a sound of pure, unadulterated hope. A sound that promised salvation. "It's fine now," All Might had arrived. "Because I am here." But the smile on his face was not his usual beaming, confident grin. It was a rictus of fury. His eyes, set in the shadows of his brow, were not looking at Shigaraki. They were locked on the Nomu, on the scene before him, and on his successor, standing impossibly against the monster that had crippled Aizawa, his body glowing with a power he shouldn't have been able to control. Relief washed over Izuku, so potent it was nauseating. But it wasn't the pure, unadulterated joy he should have felt. It was tainted. The man's consciousness saw All Might not as an invincible savior, but as a memory. A ghost. A man he had already watched die once. The grief was so sharp, so sudden, it was a physical pain in his chest. The combination of the psychic whiplash, the sudden drain of unfamiliar power, and the sheer physical and emotional overload was too much. The green lightning guttering out like a dying candle, the black tendril dissolved into nothingness. His muscles, which had been humming with controlled energy, screamed as if torn from the bone. His nerves felt like they were on fire, the world tilted on its axis, the colors smearing into a gray sludge. His knees buckled. The last thing he saw before the darkness swallowed him whole was All Might blurring past him, a comet of red, white, and blue, slamming into the Noma with the force of a meteor strike. The last thing he felt was the cold, hard stone of the plaza floor rushing up to meet his face. Consciousness returned in fragments. First, a smell. Antiseptic and a faint, sweet scent of candy. Second, a sound. The gentle, rhythmic beeping of a heart monitor and the quiet, comforting hum of an old woman. "Goodness, child. You gave us all quite the scare. Pushing yourself like that." "Recovery girl." Izuku's eyelids fluttered open. The light was soft, filtered through the blinds of what was clearly the infirmary. He was lying in a cot, a thin blanket pulled up to his chest. He tried to sit up, expecting the searing agony of shattered bones. He had used his power, hadn't he? A punch? A kick? His arm or leg should have been a useless, broken mess. He pushed himself up onto his elbows. There was a deep, profound ache in his muscles, the kind you get after the most strenuous workout of your life, but nothing was broken. Nothing was shattered. He looked at his hands, turning them over. They were his. Unbroken. The memories of the USJ came flooding back. The Noma. Shigaraki. Tsuyu's terrified face. And then, the freeze. The lightning. The flood of a future that was not his own. It was a dream, he thought, a wave of relief washing over him. A hallucination brought on by terror and the verge of death. That had to be it. It was the only explanation that made sense. He finally sat all the way up, swinging his legs over the side of the bed. His head swam for a moment, a dull throb behind his eyes. "Easy there, dearie," Recovery Girl said, bustling over. "Your vitals are stable, but your body went through an immense strain. It's a miracle you don't have a single broken bone. It seems you're finally getting a handle on that monstrous quirk of yours." He was getting a handle on it? He didn't do anything. He remembered the jump, the failure, the acceptance of his death. Then, nothing but the nightmare, the feeling of that other lightning, the ghostly sensation of the black whip. He clutched his head, a wave of dizziness and confusion making the room spin. It had felt so real. The grief for people who were still alive, the exhaustion of a war that hadn't happened. He could still feel the phantom echo of it, a cold shadow in the back of his mind. He was going crazy. The stress had finally broken his brain, and then a voice spoke. It wasn't Recovery Girl. It wasn't a sound that came through his ears. It was a voice inside his own head, clear and distinct as a bell. It was his own voice, yet it was completely alien, deeper, rougher, worn down by a weariness that felt ancient. It worked. The voice was filled with a profound, bone-deep relief. The relief of a man who had staked everything on a final, impossible chance, and had just seen it pay off. Izuku froze, his blood turning to ice. His eyes darted around the empty room, but he knew. He knew the voice wasn't from outside. Then, the voice spoke again, the relief replaced by a tone of immense, heartbreaking sorrow. A deep, guttural regret that resonated in the core of his soul. I'm sorry, me. The world swam back into focus under the soft, sterile glow of the infirmary lights. Izuku Midoriya was sitting on the edge of a cot, the thin, starched fabric of the blanket rough against his skin. The air was thick with the scent of antiseptic and Recovery Girl's signature candy-sweet perfume. His body ached, a deep, pervasive soreness that felt like he'd run a dozen marathons back-to-back. But nothing was broken. The familiar, agonizing fire of a shattered bone was mercifully absent. It was the voice that held him frozen, a voice that had resonated not in his ears, but in the very center of his skull. His own voice, yet scraped raw, aged by decades of shouting and sorrow. It worked. I'm sorry, me. He scrambled backward on the cot, his hands flying to his head, pressing against his temples as if he could physically eject the sound. No, he whispered, his throat dry and tight. No, no, no. It had to be a hallucination. A symptom of a concussion from when he collapsed. The stress of the attack, the near-death experience, it had fractured something in his mind. That was the only logical explanation. He squeezed his eyes shut, willing the phantom voice away, praying for the clean silence of his own thoughts. Panicking is a waste of energy. We don't have time for it. The voice was back, closer this time, more insistent. It was calm, measured, and utterly devoid of warmth. It was the voice of a surgeon diagnosing a terminal illness. Izuku's breath hitched. A hysterical laugh, thin and reedy, escaped his lips. I'm going crazy, he gasped, rocking back and forth. I'm hearing things. I hit my head. That's it. That's all it is. Listen to me, Izuku. You did not hit your head. You are not crazy. I am real. What are you? Izuku cried out, his voice cracking. He glanced wildly around the empty infirmary, half expecting to see a villain with a telepathic quirk hiding in the shadows. I already told you. I am you. A cold dread, more profound than anything he had felt facing the Nomu, seeped into his bones. The voice knew his name. I am Izuku Midoriya. Or what's left of him. The one from the future. The one who lost. The memories from the USJ, the flood of fire and death, surged back, no longer a hazy nightmare but sharp-edged and terrifyingly clear. He saw Ochiko's smile vanish from the world, felt the phantom impact that shattered Todoroki's eyes, tasted the ash-filled air of a ruined city. The grief was a physical weight, pressing down on his chest, stealing his breath. It wasn't real, he choked out, tears blurring his vision. That was a dream. A horrible dream. It was my life, the voice stated, the words like chips of ice. It was the future you were heading towards. The future I came back to prevent. I know you don't want to believe it. I know it's impossible, but you need to accept it. Fast. Prove it, Izuku whispered, a desperate challenge. Your mother's Katsudon. She always adds a little extra mirin because she knows you like it sweeter. You have 2,546 pieces of All Might merchandise in your room, but you hide the rare Silver Age Windy Day figurine under a loose floorboard because you're terrified of it getting sun-damaged. During the sludge villain incident, the moment before All Might appeared, you thought, and I remember this with perfect clarity, at least Kaken won't die alone. A thought you have never told a single soul. Is that enough proof? Each detail was a hammer blow, shattering his denial into smaller and smaller pieces. The floorboard. The specific thought about Kakin. These were secrets buried so deep he barely acknowledged them himself. No telepath could know that. No one. The reality of his situation crashed down on him. This wasn't a hallucination. This wasn't a dream. This was happening. A ghost, his own ghost, was living in his head. How? The word was barely a whisper. The final battle. Against all for one. He had won. Everyone was gone. I was dying. One for all was roaring inside me, a furnace with nowhere to go. I remembered something about the fourth user, Haikyuu Shinomori. His quirk, Danger Sense, wasn't just a warning system. At its absolute peak, it was a precognitive flash. I poured everything I had left, decades of stockpiled power, my very life force, into it. I didn't want to just sense the future. I wanted to scream a warning back to the past. I aimed for a pivotal moment, a nexus point where the timeline fractured. For me, that was the USJ. The moment of my first true failure. I didn't know if it would work. I thought it would just be a final, futile gesture. But it did more than send a warning. It sent me, my consciousness, my memories, a ghost in the machine. The explanation was insane, impossible, the stuff of science fiction comics. And yet, sitting in the sterile quiet of the infirmary, Izuku knew, with a certainty that terrified him, that it was the truth. He finally looked up from his hands, his gaze finding his own reflection in the dark, mirrored surface of a medical monitor. His face was pale, his freckles stark against his skin, his green hair an untamable mess. But his eyes were different. There was a shadow in them that hadn't been there before, a weariness that didn't belong. The voice softened, losing its hard edge for just a fraction of a second, replaced by that same, profound sorrow from before. I know this is terrifying. I know I'm asking the impossible, but you felt it, didn't you? The memories. The pain. The loss. That is what will happen if we fail. The raw, undiluted grief from those memories crested again. He saw All Might's withered form, his lifeblood staining the concrete. He saw the empty seats in Class 1A. He saw a world without heroes, a world ruled by the chillingly calm voice of All for One. The tears he'd been holding back finally broke free. Sobs tore through him, raw and convulsive. It wasn't just for the future he'd witnessed. It was for the boy he had been only an hour ago, the boy who believed that hard work and a good heart were enough. That boy was gone, replaced by this shivering wreck haunted by a future that had already happened. Achiko-chan. Ida-kun. He stammered through his tears. Everyone, they can't. They won't. Not this time, the voice, now firm again, interrupted. That's why I'm here. I am the culmination of every mistake we ever made. I am a weapon forged from failure, and you are the hand that will wield me. But you need to stop crying. Tears are a luxury we can no longer afford. They won't bring back the ghosts I live with every single day. The coldness of the statement was a slap in the face. Izuku's sobs hitched. How can you be so calm? I just saw our friends die. He shouted, his voice hoarse. I saw All Might die. Doesn't that mean anything to you? It means everything, the voice, now resonating with a dangerous, banked fury, shot back. It's the only thing that matters. I have lived with their deaths for 20 years. That grief is etched into my soul. It is the fuel that sent me back here. But I learned a long time ago that mourning doesn't change the past. Only action can change the future. Our actions. Right now, your emotions are a liability. They make you sloppy. They make you hesitate. Hesitation gets people killed. They're not people. Izuku retorted, his own anger flaring through the grief. They're our friends. You talk about them like they're just pieces in a game. In the war against All for One, that is exactly what they are, the voice, which Izuku was now mentally christening Deku, stated flatly. Uravity's quirk is a peerless asset for urban mobility and debris removal. Ingenium's speed is vital for reconnaissance and rapid response. Creati's strategic mind and versatile quirk can turn the tide of any battle if properly supported. They are resources. Precious, irreplaceable resources that we failed to protect the first time. This time, we will use them correctly. We will protect them by making them stronger, by guiding their choices, by removing sentiment from the equation. Izuku stared at his reflection, horrified. This thing inside him, this future version of himself, was a monster. He was cold, calculating, and ruthless. He was everything Izuku had sworn he would never be. No, Izuku said, his voice low and trembling with conviction. I won't do that. I'll save them, yes. But I'll save them my way. By being their friend. By fighting alongside them. Not by using them like tools. Your way leads to a graveyard full of headstones with their names on them. Deku roared in his mind, the force of it making Izuku flinch. Your idealism, your need to save everyone with a smile, your hesitation to make the hard choices. That is what he exploited. All for one broke you not by breaking your body, but by breaking your spirit, one dead friend at a time. Get out of my head! Izuku screamed, the sound echoing in the small room. He pressed his palms hard against his ears, a futile gesture. I'm not you! I'll never be you! A heavy, suffocating silence filled his mind for a long moment. When Deku spoke again, his voice was quiet, devoid of anger, and filled with a chilling finality that was worse than any shout. You already are. You just haven't lost everything yet. Before Izuku could process the devastating weight of that sentence, the infirmary door slid open with a soft hiss. He looked up, hastily scrubbing the tears from his face with the back of his hand. Standing in the doorway was a painfully thin, skeletal figure with sunken eyes and a shock of blonde hair. Tashinori Yagi, All Might. The sight of him, so fragile and alive, sent another pang of vicarious grief through Izuku's heart. He had to physically restrain himself from running to the man and checking if he was real. Young Midoriya, Tashinori said, his voice a low rumble of concern. He stepped inside, letting the door slide shut behind him. Recovery girl told me you were awake. Are you alright, my boy? That was quite a display at the plaza. Izuku opened his mouth to reply, to offer the panicked, stuttering explanation he was used to. I don't know, All Might. My body, it was, no. Deku's voice was a steel command in his mind. That's weak. It's suspicious. He felt the shift in One for All. You need a plausible cover story. Let me handle this. Straighten your back. Control your breathing. Look him in the eye. It was a battle of wills fought in the space of a heartbeat. Izuku's instinct was to defer, to be the fumbling, earnest student. But the phantom pain of All Might's death was too fresh, too raw. The future self-certainty was an anchor in the storm of his panic. Reluctantly, he ceded a measure of control. His posture, which had been slumped in despair, subtly straightened. His frantic breathing evened out into a slow, deliberate rhythm. He met his mentor's worried gaze, and the frantic terror in his eyes was banked, replaced by a calm, analytical focus. I'm alright, All Might, he said. His voice was steady, the familiar stutter completely absent. It was jarring, even to his own ears. My muscles are sore, but there are no breaks. I think I had a breakthrough. Tashinori's eyebrows, which were already halfway up his forehead, rose even higher. He pulled a chair over to the cot and sat down, his gaze sharp and searching. A breakthrough? He prompted, leaning forward. Young Midoriya, what I saw, what I felt, when I arrived, for a moment, One for All felt different. It wasn't just you. It felt older. Wiser. It had a discipline to it that I've only ever felt from my master, and then, just as quickly, it was gone. What happened? This was the test. The first lie in a future that would be built on them. Desperation is the mother of innovation, Deku coached from the back of his mind. Tell him the fear of death, the need to protect Ajui, triggered a new level of control. A survival instinct. I think it was just desperation, Izuku said, choosing his words with an unnatural precision. When the gnome was about to kill me, everything seemed to slow down. I was so terrified of breaking my bones and being useless, of letting Tsuyu-san die. It was like my body, my quirk, was desperately searching for a way to answer my will without self-destructing. The energy, it didn't burst out. It wrapped around me instead. It felt stable. He paused, accessing a memory that wasn't his. And the black whip. I don't know what that was. It just happened. An instinct. It was a perfect explanation. Plausible, rooted in the known mechanics of quirks evolving under stress, and flattering to his own potential. The boy, Izuku, was in awe of the lie's construction. The man, Deku, knew it was the bare minimum required to placate a concerned mentor. Toshinori sat back in his chair, his expression unreadable. He looked proud, but also deeply troubled. A full-body reinforcement without breaking your limbs, and a secondary manifestation from One for All. My boy, that's incredible. It took me years to get that kind of control. To think you could achieve it under such duress. I'm so proud of you. But his eyes told a different story. They weren't just looking at Izuku, they were looking into him. But your eyes, young Midoriya, he said softly, his voice laced with an unease that cut through the praise. When you woke up, recovery girls said you were distressed. And now you seem so calm. Too calm. The boy I know would be vibrating with 1,000 questions, analyzing every second of what happened. You look like a soldier after a long, hard-fought battle. Izuku's heart hammered in his chest. He'd been seen. The mask was already cracking. Don't fidget. Don't look away, Deku commanded. He's looking for the boy. Show him a man. Acknowledge his concern, but frame it as a change in perspective. The near-death experience matured you. Facing that monster, thinking I was about to die, that my friends were about to die. Izuku began, letting a sliver of genuine remembered terror color his tone. It changes you, All Might. I guess a part of me realized I can't just be a fanboy anymore. I have to be a hero. Right now. There's no more time for hesitation. The words hung in the air between them. Toshinori's gaze softened with sympathy, but the sharp glint of suspicion remained. He reached out, placing a large, bony hand on Izuku's shoulder. The touch was meant to be comforting, fatherly. But to the new, merged consciousness, it felt like a ghost's caress. Izuku had to fight the urge to flinch away from the memory of this same hand, cold and lifeless. You are right, of course, Toshinori said, his voice heavy. You faced true evil today, and you did not falter. You saved your friend. You were a true hero. I just worry, my boy. This power is a great burden. Don't lose yourself under its weight. Don't forget the boy who wanted to save people with a smile. He is your greatest strength. He gave Izuku's shoulder a final squeeze, the gesture feeling strangely hollow. Get some rest. The police will need your statement later, but for now, recover. You've earned it. With a final, searching look, All Might stood and left the infirmary, leaving Izuku alone once more with the voice in his head. The moment the door closed, the rigid posture Izuku was holding collapsed. He slumped forward, his head in his hands trembling. He knows, Izuku whispered. He doesn't believe us. He doesn't have to believe us, Deku replied, his tone pragmatic. He just has to accept the results. The mission is all that matters. You did well. Your control over your emotions is poor, but your execution of the lie was adequate. We can build on this. I don't want to lie to him. Izuku shot back, his voice thick with misery. He's All Might. He trusted me with his power, with his secret. And we're lying to his face. We are protecting him, Deku countered, his voice unyielding. Do you think that man, the symbol of peace who carries the weight of the world on his shoulders, could bear the knowledge I carry? If I told him the unvarnished truth, that in my time, his noble sacrifice at Kamino was a Pyrrhic victory that ultimately led to All for One's triumph, that every single one of his beloved students dies, that his legacy is a global graveyard, it would break him. It would extinguish the fire in his heart for good. Our lie is a shield. It preserves the symbol of peace so he can fight the battles we need him to fight. It is a necessary cruelty. Izuku had no response. The cold, brutal logic of it was undeniable. How could he argue for a truth that would destroy the man he idolized? Exhaustion, deeper than any he had ever known, settled over him. It was the exhaustion of a battle fought on two fronts, one in the physical world, and a far more brutal one within his own soul. He felt stretched thin, a fragile bridge between two vastly different versions of himself. "This is our life now," Deku said, the words less a statement and more a decree. "Two pilots, one body. We will train. We will prepare. We will use my knowledge to avert every disaster, to counter every move the enemy makes. We will not be reactive. We will be proactive. The timeline is already broken. Now we forge a new one." Izuku leaned back on the cot, his gaze drifting to the small television mounted on the wall. He fumbled for the remote on the bedside table and switched it on. The screen flickered to life, showing a news broadcast. A reporter was standing in front of the USJ, the familiar dome visible behind her, emergency vehicles still swarming the area. The headline at the bottom of the screen read, "Villain attack at UA High. Pro-hero eraser head in critical condition, All Might intervenes." The reporter's voice was grim. "Details are still emerging, but sources say a group calling themselves the League of Villains infiltrated the training facility with the intent to kill the symbol of peace, All Might." Izuku watched, his heart a leaden weight in his chest. This was it. The beginning. The first shot in a war he now knew was coming. A war his other self had already lost. He stared at his reflection in the dark screen. He saw his own round, boyish face, framed by a chaotic mop of green hair. But his eyes, staring back at him from the glass, were ancient. They held the boy's fear and the man's sorrow, the student's hope and the soldier's resolve. It was the face of two souls bound together, a living paradox. A hero and the ghost of his own failure, united by a single, terrifying purpose. The war for the future had begun. And this time, Deku would not lose. The return to the routine of school life should have been a comfort. The familiar drone of present Mick's English lesson, the scent of chalk dust, the casual chatter of his classmates, it was the mundane rhythm of a life he had fought to protect. But for Izuku Midoriya, it was like listening to a beloved song played in the wrong key. Everything was slightly off, distorted by the silent passenger in his mind. He sat at his desk, back ramrod straight, a posture dictated by the unwavering discipline of his future self. His pen moved across his notebook, but he wasn't muttering. The frantic, semi-audible stream of consciousness analysis that had been his trademark was gone, replaced by a deep, unnerving silence. His thoughts were still racing, but they were no longer his alone. They were a structured, internal dialogue. Present Mick's vocal projection could be weaponized with the right support gear, observed the boy, the thought a familiar spark of analytical curiosity. A directional sonic amplifier could incapacitate multiple targets non-lethally. Inefficient against villains with hearing protection or nullification quirks, Deku countered, his mental voice as dry as dust. Better application, crowd control and creating diversions. Note its effect on seismic-sensitive opponents. Low-frequency resonance could be a vulnerability. Focus on the lesson. English proficiency is critical for international hero work. My timeline's global alliances failed partly due to communication breakdowns. Izuku's pen paused. The idea that learning English was a matter of life and death, a strategic component in a global war, was so far beyond his previous scope of thinking that it gave him a peculiar sort of vertigo. He diligently went back to conjugating verbs, the simple task now freighted with an impossible weight. This internal push and pull was constant, a relentless debate between idealism and pragmatism, emotion and logic. The boy would see a friend and feel a rush of warmth. The man would see an asset and run a threat assessment. The changes did not go unnoticed. "Hey, Deku-kun!" Izuku looked up. Achiko Uraraka was leaning over his desk, her round face bright with her usual effervescent cheer. Her brown eyes were full of genuine concern. "Are you feeling okay? You've been really quiet today." His first instinct, the boy's instinct, was to smile, blush, and stammer out a reassuring, flustered response. He opened his mouth, the familiar "I am fine, Uraraka-san," already on his lips. "Stop." The command from Deku was absolute. Do not show weakness. But do not be cold. She is a key ally. Her trust is a tactical advantage. Be calm. Reassuring. Distant. The conflict was a physical jolt. For a split second, Izuku's expression froze, caught between a bashful smile and a neutral mask. He settled on a small, polite nod. I'm alright, Uraraka-san. Just thinking a lot since the USJ. It was a wake-up call. The words were true, but the delivery was foreign. His voice was steady, his gaze direct. He didn't blush or look away. Achiko's smile faltered slightly. She was used to his nervous energy. This placid, almost solemn demeanor was new. Oh. Yeah, I get that, she said, her own cheer dimming a little. It was super scary, but we all made it out, thanks to you and the teachers. You were so amazing, Deku-kun. That black whip thing was so cool, and you were so fast. He should have lit up at the praise, especially from her. Instead, he felt a phantom pang of grief. He was seeing her face, but overlaid with the memory of a cracked helmet and a choked, final breath. The man inside him saw a ghost. I just did what anyone would have, he replied, his voice flat. The response was a stock hero platitude, devoid of his usual sincerity. Achiko's brow furrowed. The distance between them felt like a physical chasm. Well, if you need to talk about it, I'm here, okay? She offered, though her tone was now laced with a hint of uncertainty, as if she were speaking to a stranger. Thank you, Uraraka-san. I appreciate that. He gave her a small, practiced smile that didn't reach his eyes, then turned his attention back to his notebook, a clear, if polite, dismissal. She lingered for a moment longer before retreating to her desk, her expression a mixture of confusion and hurt. He had saved her life, yet he had never felt further away. Tenya Ida was next. He approached Izuku's desk with his usual crisp, chopping motions, though his face was more severe than usual. Midoriya-kun, he began, pushing his glasses up his nose. I wish to commend you on your newfound discipline in the classroom. Your focus is exemplary. However, he chopped the air for emphasis, I have also observed a distinct lack of camaraderie. You have not engaged in social discussion once today. A healthy work-life balance is essential for a hero's mental fortitude. Are you isolating yourself? He's analyzing your behavior, Deku noted. His rigid adherence to rules can be a flaw, but his observational skills are sharp. Frame your change in a way he will understand, as a pursuit of efficiency. Izuku looked up at Ida, his expression serious. Ida-kun. At the USJ, I learned that a moment's hesitation can mean the difference between life and death. I'm reevaluating my priorities. Wasted time is a resource we can't afford to squander. My focus is on improvement. Every second counts. Ada froze mid-chop, his mouth slightly ageki. This was language he understood perfectly. Efficiency. Prioritization. It was the gospel of the Ida family, and yet, coming from the formerly anxious and emotional Midoriya, it was deeply unsettling. He saw the logic, but he felt the absence of his friend. I see, Ida said slowly, lowering his hand. A most logical conclusion. While I still advocate for periods of social rest, I cannot fault your dedication to self-improvement. Carry on. He marched back to his seat, but he cast several concerned glances at Izuku throughout the rest of the day. The boy who had inspired him to be more flexible was now more rigid than he was. The most profound reaction, however, came from the one person Izuku, the original Izuku, dreaded and expected it from the most. Katsuki Bakugo. He hadn't said a word to Izuku all day. He had just watched him. His crimson eyes, usually blazing with explosive rage, were narrowed in sharp, suspicious scrutiny. He observed Izuku's straight-backed posture, his silent note-taking, his calm, measured responses to Uraraka and Ida. He saw the other extras reacting with confusion, but Bakugo saw something more. He saw a lie. He had spent his entire life defining himself in opposition to Izuku Midoriya. Deku was the useless, quirkless, crybaby pebble in his path. Then he was the baffling, self-destructive idiot who'd somehow gotten a quirk. But he was always, fundamentally Deku. Weak. Emotional. A follower. The person sitting in that chair was none of those things. The breaking point came during hero basic training. The exercise was a simple one-on-one sparring match, meant to refamiliarize them with combat after the traumatic events of the USJ. All Might, in his booming hero form, drew the names from a box. First match. Young Bakugo vs. Young Midoriya. A collective gasp went through the class. Their last public fight had been a brutal, emotionally charged affair that had left the training grounds in ruins and Midoriya in the infirmary. Bakugo's face split into a feral grin, all sharp teeth and manic energy. Finally, a chance to beat the truth out of this imposter. Whatever trick Deku had pulled at the ESJ, he'd expose it for the fluke it was. Get ready to die, you damn nerd! He snarled, his palms already starting to pop and crackle. Izuku, by contrast, merely stood up and walked towards the sparring arena. There was no fear in his eyes, no nervous trembling. Just a calm, steady appraisal of his opponent. His right hook is his tell, Deku's voice murmured in his mind. He always leads with it when he's angry. He telegraphs his AP shot by lowering his left shoulder. He has a blind spot on his lower left side when he uses his larger explosions for propulsion. I have fought him, a stronger, faster, smarter version of him, a dozen times in simulations. We know his every move. The boy's heart was still hammering. This was Kaken, the walking embodiment of his childhood fear and his lifelong rival. The instinct to flinch, to cower, was deeply ingrained. That instinct will get you killed, Deku stated coldly. This is not your childhood friend. This is an opponent. Neutralize him. Begin! All Might shouted. Bakugo didn't waste a second. He shot forward, a human missile propelled by a series of controlled explosions. Die! He screamed, his right arm swinging around in a wide, powerful hook, just as Deku's inner voice had predicted. It was the same opening move he'd used in their first battle. The old Izuku would have tried to block it, or dodged clumsily. The new Izuku did neither. He took a single, precise step back and to the left. The motion was fluid, economical, almost lazy. Bakugo's fist, crackling with explosive power, sliced through the air where Izuku's head had been a millisecond before. The wind from the blow ruffled his hair. Bakugo's eyes widened in shock at the effortless dodge. He spun, correcting his momentum, and unleashed a blast from his left palm. Izuku was already moving. He dropped low, the explosive force sailing over him, and pivoted on his heel. He was now inside Bakugo's guard, too close for a large-scale explosion. Now. Right knee, side of the thigh. A simple nerve strike. It won't cause lasting damage, but it will deaden the leg. Izuku's leg snapped out in a low kick, but he pulled it at the last second. The boy's consciousness screamed in protest. I can't hurt him like that. It's just a spar. Hesitation. Deku roared in his mind. The internal conflict cost him a precious half-second. It was all Bakugo needed. Sensing the danger, he propelled himself backward with a small blast, creating distance. He landed in a crouch, his teeth bared in a snarl, but his eyes were filled with a wild, confused fury. What the hell was that? He spat. You're not even using your damn quirk. Fight me, you coward! I don't need it, Izuku replied, his voice level. He remained in his relaxed, ready stance. The statement wasn't a boast. It was a simple statement of fact. That broke something in Bakugo. To be told by Deku that he wasn't even worth using a quirk against was the ultimate insult. With a wordless scream of pure rage, he launched himself forward again, this time abandoning all pretense of strategy. He was a whirlwind of explosions, a storm of light and sound, and Izuku moved through it like a ghost. Guided by the future self's perfect memory and combat experience, he became a study in motion. A slight tilt of the head to avoid a jab. A simple sidestep to evade a blast. A graceful turn that used Bakugo's own momentum to send him stumbling past. He never attacked. He just wasn't there. His feet barely seemed to leave the ground, his movements so small and precise that to the onlookers, it seemed like Bakugo's attacks were miraculously missing him by inches every single time. He wasn't fighting. He was dancing. And it was humiliating. The class was silent, their jaws slack. This wasn't the Midoriya they knew. The boy who broke his bones with every punch was effortlessly evading the top student in their class without even activating his power. All Might watched from the sidelines, his hero's smile gone, replaced by a deep, troubled frown. He recognized the style. It was subtle, but it was there. The hyper-efficiency, the predictive movements. It was the fighting style of his own master, Nana Shimura, adapted by Gran Torino. a style he had tried to teach Izuku, but the boy had been too uncoordinated to grasp. Yet here he was, using its core principles flawlessly. After a full minute of fruitless, exhausting attacks, Bakugo was panting, sweat pouring down his face, his arms trembling from the strain. He stood in the center of the arena, his chest heaving, staring at Izuku, who hadn't even broken a sweat. His costume wasn't even singed. "What is this?" Bakugo gasped, his voice raspy. "What kind of sick joke is this, Deku?" Izuku took a slow step forward. "End it," Deku commanded. "Disarm and subdue. Show him the gap between us is no longer bridgeable." Izuku walked until he was just out of arm's reach. He looked Bakugo in the eye, and for the first time in the fight, he spoke with the boy's voice, though it was laced with the man's weary sadness. "I'm not making fun of you, Kaken," he said softly. The use of the childhood nickname, combined with the impossible display of skill, made something in Bakugo snap. He let out a final, desperate roar and lunged, his right hand outstretched, palm glowing for his most powerful, close-range explosion. Howitzer impact. It was a point-blank attack. Unavoidable, Izuku sighed. A sound of profound disappointment. He didn't dodge. He moved forward. In a blur of motion, his left hand shot up and caught Bakugo's wrist. His right hand came up under the elbow. With a simple, fluid twist that was pure biomechanics, he redirected Bakugo's arm upwards. Boom! The explosion detonated harmlessly towards the ceiling, a brilliant flash of light and a deafening roar. In the ringing silence that followed, everyone saw the final tableau. Izuku was still holding Bakugo's arm, his grip like iron. With his other hand, he reached out and gently tapped Bakugo on the forehead with 2 fingers. "Tag," Izuku said quietly. "You lose." He released his grip. Bakugo stumbled back, his arm dropping limply to his side. He stared at Izuku, his face a mask of utter disbelief. The rage was gone, burned out, replaced by a chilling, hollow confusion. He looked at his own hands, then back at the boy in front of him. The boy who had been a pebble, a stepping stone, his entire life. That boy was gone. In his place was a mountain. "Who the hell are you?" Bakugo whispered, the question raw and genuine. It wasn't an insult. It was a real question. "You're not Deku." All Might chose that moment to step in, his voice booming to break the thick, uncomfortable silence. That's enough. The winner is young Midoriya." Bakugo didn't seem to hear him. He just kept staring, his world completely upended. He had built his entire identity on the premise of being the strongest, of surpassing All Might. But in that moment, he was staring at someone who felt utterly, impossibly out of reach. For the first time in his life, Katsuki Bakugo felt true, profound fear. Not the fear of a villain, but the fear of being left behind. Later that day, after school, the merged Izuku didn't go home. He directed his feet towards the familiar, trash-strewn sands of Dagoba Municipal Beach Park. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the coastline that was now, thanks to his earlier efforts, almost completely clean. The salt-laced wind was cool on his face. He stood at the water's edge, watching the waves roll in. "You hesitated," Deku's voice stated, breaking the silence. There was no anger in it, just a cold assessment. "You pulled the kick. You could have ended the spar in seconds, but you let it drag on." "Why? He's my friend," Izuku replied, his voice quiet. He wrapped his arms around himself. "It was just a spar. I didn't want to hurt him. He is not your friend." "Not yet. In my time, he became my greatest comrade, the only one who could truly watch my back. We forged that bond through blood and battle and a mutual, hard-won respect. You cannot skip to that point. Right now, he is a volatile rival who needs to understand the new hierarchy. Your sentimentality put you at risk." "It wasn't a risk. You knew his every move. A principle is a principle. In a real fight, that hesitation would be a hole in our defense. It's a flaw that must be corrected. You are the heart, and I am the head. But the head must be in charge when survival is on the line." "I don't want to be like you," Izuku whispered to the waves. "I don't want to be cold and empty." For a long moment, there was only the sound of the surf. Then, Deku's voice returned softer, tinged with that familiar, ancient grief. Neither did I. The admission was a crack in the armor, a glimpse of the boy he had once been. I wanted to save everyone with a smile. I really did. I held on to that ideal, even as they died around me. I smiled for the cameras while I was weeping on the inside. I smiled until my face cracked, and in the end, my smile didn't save anyone. My pragmatism, my ruthlessness, that's what kept the last few survivors alive for as long as they were. It's an ugly truth, but it's the truth. He paused. I am not trying to erase you, Izuku. I am trying to keep you from becoming me. I am giving you my strength, my knowledge, so you can succeed where I failed. So you can hold on to your heart. But to do that, you must let me guide your hand when the blade is at our throat. You must trust me. Izuku looked down at his own reflection in the wet sand. A distorted, wavering image of a boy with haunted eyes. He had effortlessly defeated Kaken. He had coolly navigated the concerns of his friends. He had lied to the face of his idol. He was becoming more competent, more powerful, more effective, and he was becoming more alone. He felt the presence before he saw him. A large, skeletal shadow fell over him. Dagoba Beach, Toshinori Yagi's voice rumbled. I had a feeling I might find you here. Izuku turned. All Might was in his civilian form, his oversized clothes flapping in the wind. His expression was grim. The sparring match today, Toshinori began, walking to stand beside him. I've seen that style before. Gran Torino. He's a harsh master. I didn't think you'd be ready for his teachings for years, and yet you moved like you'd been practicing with him your whole life. Izuku's mouth went dry. Another test. Another lie required. Tell him you studied his old fights, Deku supplied instantly. Tell him you saw Gran Torino in a documentary and have been trying to mimic the style. It's thin, but it's all we have. I watch a lot of old hero footage, Izuku began, but the words felt like ash in his mouth. He looked at his mentor, at the man who had given him everything, at the ghost he was trying so desperately to protect. The lies were suffocating him. He made a decision. A partial truth. A gamble. All Might, he said, his voice shaking but firm. The breakthrough I had at the USJ, it wasn't just about control. It was information. When I thought I was going to die, One for All showed me things. Toshinori's sunken eyes widened. Showed you things? What do you mean? Visions? Flashes, Izuku said, choosing his words carefully. Of past users. Their skills. Their movements. It's like an echo. When I was fighting Kaken, I wasn't consciously thinking. I was just moving, guided by a memory of a fight that wasn't mine. It feels like a part of them is still inside the quirk. This, at least, felt true. It was a palatable, metaphorical version of the literal truth. It explained his sudden skill without revealing the apocalyptic future or the parasitic consciousness. Toshinori stared at him, his mind clearly racing. Echoes of the past users. Nana, she never mentioned anything like that. But One for All is a singularity. It grows with each generation. It's possible. My boy, this is an unprecedented development. He looked out at the ocean, a new light in his eyes. It wasn't the suspicious glint from before. It was the excited, analytical gleam of a mentor facing a brand new mystery. He had been given a puzzle he could solve, a way to understand the change in his student without resorting to a terrifying, unknown explanation. The gamble had paid off. This changes things, Toshinori murmured. This means you have access to a library of experience. A wellspring of talent from 8 generations of heroes. We must be careful. We must study this phenomenon. He turned back to Izuku, a genuine, hopeful smile finally returning to his face. You are not just my successor, young Midoriya. You are the inheritor of a legacy in a way I never was. This is wonderful. Izuku watched him, a profound sadness settling over him. He had protected his mentor's spirit, but he had done it by building the walls between them even higher. He had given him a new mystery to solve, a new project to focus on, ensuring All Might would never look too closely at the haunted boy right in front of him. He was safe. He was alone. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple, Izuku Midoriya stood beside the symbol of peace, a stranger in his own skin. He was becoming the hero his future self needed him to be, powerful, efficient, and utterly isolated. The reflection in the water showed a boy who was winning every battle, at the cost of losing himself. The lie, a carefully constructed shield of partial truths, had settled between Izuku and All Might, offering a fragile peace. Tashinori had a new puzzle to solve, the echoes of past users, a mystery that would occupy his brilliant mind and keep him from probing the deeper, more terrifying reality of Izuku's transformation. It was a necessary cruelty, a strategic deception, and it left Izuku feeling profoundly, achingly alone. But there was no time for mourning his own isolation. The war had begun, and his training was decades behind schedule. The next day, Hero Basic Training was held in Gym Gamma, a vast concrete playground of pillars, platforms, and collapsible structures designed by Cementos. The air was cool and smelled of stone dust. Mr. Aizawa, looking like a mummy with his face almost entirely obscured by bandages, was observing from the sidelines, his one visible eye sharp and unforgiving. He'd insisted on returning to duty, a testament to a grit that both Izuku and the ghost in his head deeply respected. As the other students began their individual training exercises, Izuku stood apart, his gaze distant. The first lesson, Deku's voice echoed in his mind, sharp and devoid of pleasantries. Forget everything All Might told you about One for All. Izuku flinched. The thought felt like blasphemy. What? But he's a wonderful hero and a brilliant brawler, Deku cut him off, his tone leaving no room for argument. But he is a natural. He was born with a body that could handle the strain. He tamed One for All through sheer force of will and physical aptitude. You are not. Your body is a glass cannon. His methods, the egg in the microwave analogy, taught you to think of the power as something to be contained before it explodes. That is fundamentally wrong. It treats the power as an enemy. Then what is it? Izuku asked, his own thoughts a quiet whisper against the man's certainty. It's you. It's a part of your body, like your circulatory system. You don't flex to keep your blood from exploding out of your veins. It flows. It circulates. One for All must do the same. You have been trying to use a floodlight as a sledgehammer. Today, we learn how to make it flow. With Mr. Aizawa's nod of approval, Izuku moved to a clear area of the gym floor. His classmates threw him curious glances. They'd all seen the sparring match with Bakugo. They were expecting another display of impossible skill. All right, Izuku thought, taking a deep breath. Flow. Not force. He closed his eyes and reached for the familiar wellspring of power within him. He tried to imagine it not as a roaring sun in his chest, but as a warm liquid, ready to be pumped through his limbs. He visualized it spreading, moving down his arms, his legs, his torso, a gentle tide of energy. He activated One for All. The result was instantaneous and agonizing. Instead of a flow, the power jagged through his body in uncontrolled bursts. His muscles seized violently, as if hit with 1,000 tasers at once. Green lightning, wild and chaotic, erupted from his skin in angry, spitting arcs. One moment his left leg felt like it was being torn from its socket, the next his right arm went completely numb. He let out a choked cry and collapsed to his knees, his entire body convulsing. The power died as quickly as it had surged, leaving him trembling and gasping on the cold concrete. Kirishima, who was training nearby, took a step towards him. Whoa, Midoriya! You okay, man? Before Izuku could answer, Aizawa's voice cut through the air, raspy but firm. He's fine, Kirishima. Focus on your own training. Midoriya is working on a new application. Pushing his limits, Izuku looked up at his teacher, grateful for the intervention. Aizawa's visible eye held a flicker of something, concern, but also a grim understanding. He knew the cost of pushing one's quirk to its absolute edge. Pathetic, Deku's voice was like a bucket of ice water. You tried to command it. You don't command a river to flow, you guide it. You create the path for it. Your body is the riverbed. Your focus is the gradient. You are fighting yourself. Again. It hurts. Izuku shot back, shame and frustration burning in his chest. It feels like my nerves are being fried. Good. Pain is a teacher. It tells you where you're failing. The pain is the energy hitting a blockage, a dam of tension in your muscles. You're still thinking of it as an invader. Stop fighting. Surrender to it. Let it move. Start smaller. 1%. Don't even try to move. Just let it exist in you. Izuku took a shaky breath, pushing himself back to his feet. He ignored the worried looks from his classmates. He closed his eyes again, his body still twitching with phantom pains. 1%. It was an amount of power he usually wouldn't even register. He focused, trying to draw just a sliver, a single thread from the roaring furnace inside him. He didn't try to send it anywhere. He just held it. For a second it worked. A faint, almost invisible shimmer of green light coated his skin. His hair lifted slightly. But it was unstable. His own tension, his fear of the pain, made his muscles clench involuntarily. The 1% surged to 3%, then 5%. A sharp, stabbing pain shot through his shoulder. He gasped and lost his focus, the power vanishing completely. Again, he tried again. And again. And again. For the entire period, Izuku Midoriya, the boy who had stunned everyone with his impossible skill, did nothing but stand in one spot, occasionally flickering with a weak green light before crying out in pain or collapsing. Bakugo watched him from across the gym, his crimson eyes narrowed. He was pummeling a concrete pillar, his explosions more ferocious than ever. But his gaze kept flicking back to Izuku. He wasn't seeing failure. He was seeing a process. He'd seen Deku's effortless perfection in their spar, and now he was seeing the brutal, ugly work that went into it. It wasn't a fluke. It was training, and it made his teeth grind with a new, unfamiliar frustration that was less anger and more a terrifying sense of urgency. When the bell rang, Izuku was drenched in sweat, his muscles trembling with exhaustion. He hadn't taken a single step, yet he felt more drained than if he'd run a marathon. He had failed. I can't do it, he thought, despair a cold, heavy stone in his stomach. It's impossible. No, it's not, Deku said. The voice was still firm, but it had lost some of its biting edge. You held it for 3 full seconds on that last attempt. That's progress. This is the hardest part, unlearning a lifetime of bad habits. All Might's method taught you to brace for impact. I am teaching you to become the current. It's a fundamental rewiring of your instincts. It won't happen in an hour. We're not done for the day. What? But school's over. Our training is never over. Meet me at Dagoba Beach. Now. The sun was a pale, watery yellow, beginning its slow descent towards the horizon. The salty air of Dagoba Beach was a familiar comfort, but the clean shorelines served as a stark reminder of a different, simpler time of training. Izuku dragged his feet through the sand, his school bag slung over a shoulder that ached with a deep, resonating thrum. Drop the bag. Take off your blazer and shoes. We're not stopping until you can hold a stable 1% for 5 minutes straight. 5 minutes? Izuku gasped, horrified. I couldn't even hold it for 5 seconds. Then we have a lot of work to do, and so began the true crucible. The training at the gym had been a prelude. Here, under the watchful eye of his own ghost, there were no classmates to worry about, no teachers to impress. There was only the sand, the sea, and the relentless voice in his head. He stood at the water's edge, the cool foam washing over his bare feet. He closed his eyes and tried again. He reached for that single thread of power. The green shimmer appeared. His body immediately tensed. Breathe, Deku commanded. Don't hold your breath. In through the nose, out through the mouth. Feel the tension in your shoulders. Release it. Izuku forced his lungs to work. The shimmer stabilized. 1 second. 2. Your jaw is clenched. Relax it. You're grinding your teeth. Stop. The muscles in his jaw were granite. He tried to consciously relax them. The effort of doing so broke his concentration. The power flickered and died. He slumped forward, hands on his knees. Again, he straightened up. He tried again. Your right leg. You're putting too much weight on it. It's an old habit from when you expected it to break. Distribute your weight evenly. Center yourself. He adjusted his stance. The power vanished. Again. The cycle repeated, endlessly. Every attempt revealed a new flaw, a new layer of unconscious tension he had to identify and release. It was maddening. It was an exercise in pure mental endurance, forcing him to become hyper-aware of every single muscle fiber in his body. He learned to feel the power not as a weapon, but as a presence. He felt it pull in his clenched fists, and Deku would tell him to relax his hands. He felt it spike in his legs when he thought about running, and Deku would command him to root himself to the spot. "I can't!" he finally yelled after what felt like an eternity, his voice raw. He had managed to hold the 1% for nearly a minute before a particularly violent muscle spasm in his back had thrown him to the sand. "Every time I think I have it, my body just betrays me. It's like it's scared of the power." "Of course it is," Deku said, his voice quiet for once. "You have spent months teaching it that using this power equals agonizing pain. We are now telling it to embrace that pain, to let the fire flow through its veins without flinching. You are not just training your quirk, you are retraining your survival instincts. It is the hardest thing a hero can do. Get up." There was something in that explanation, a flicker of empathy, of understanding, that quelled Izuku's frustration. He wasn't just being berated, he was being taught. He pushed himself up, his body screaming in protest, sand clinging to his sweat-dampened uniform. He took a deep breath. "Okay. Retraining my instincts," he tried again. This time, when the power flickered to life, he didn't fight the initial jolt of pain. He accepted it. He let the energy settle, and when a muscle in his arm seized, he breathed through the cramp instead of panicking. He focused on Deku's mental image, a circulatory system. The power wasn't a monster, it was his own blood, his own life force. The green shimmer around him held. It was faint, but it was stable. 10 seconds, 30, a full minute. His body was trembling, every muscle vibrating with contained energy. It was like holding a live wire. 2 minutes. Sweat poured down his face, stinging his eyes. 3. A group of seagulls landed nearby, watching him with beady, indifferent eyes. 4. His vision started to blur at the edges. The strain was immense. Don't focus on the time. Focus on the flow. Feel it circling. From your heart, down your legs, into the earth, up your spine, through your arms, back to your heart. Create the loop. Become the circuit. Izuku latched onto the visualization. He pictured the green energy moving inside him, a gentle, continuous river. The trembling in his limbs lessened slightly. The pain receded from a sharp, stabbing agony to a deep, throbbing ache. The alarm on his phone, which he'd set on Deku's instruction, chimed softly. 5 minutes. He had done it. He released the power, and his legs gave out instantly. He collapsed onto the wet sand, his chest heaving, his body feeling like a hollowed-out shell. He had never felt so completely and utterly drained in his entire life. A weak, watery laugh escaped his lips. "I did it." "Yes," Deku affirmed. There was a hint of something in his voice. It wasn't praise, not exactly. It was the grim satisfaction of a tool being properly calibrated. "You have established a baseline. Tomorrow, we do it while walking. Then jogging. Then running. Then fighting. 1% is the foundation. Now we build the house." Exhaustion finally overwhelmed him. Izuku lay on his back, the last rays of the setting sun warming his face, and let the darkness claim him for a few moments of blissful, thought-free rest. When he drifted back to awareness, the sky was a deep, bruised purple. He was stiff, sore, and chilled. He sat up, groaning. He felt different. The constant thrum of anxiety that had been his companion for his entire life was muted, replaced by a deep, physical weariness. And the ghost in his head was quiet. For the first time since the merge, the other voice was silent. "Deku?" he whispered into the twilight. For a moment, he thought he was alone again. A flash of both terror and relief went through him. Then the voice returned, but it was subdued, distant. "I'm here. Are you okay?" Izuku asked, a strange wave of concern washing over him. The voice had sounded lost. "I'm tired," the future self admitted. The admission was a profound crack in his hardened facade. "Guiding you, focusing my consciousness to this degree, it takes a toll. It feels like I'm lucid dreaming a life I already failed. It's draining. Izuku hugged his knees to his chest, the salt spray misting his face. How did you do it? He asked softly. How did you learn all this? The fighting, the control. How did you stand the pain for so long? There was a long pause, filled only by the rhythmic crash of the waves. When Deku spoke again, the voice was heavy with memory, stained with a grief that felt impossibly vast. I didn't have a choice. And I didn't have a guide. I learned through breaking. Every shattered bone was a lesson. I spent more time in Recovery Girl's office than my own dorm room. All Might, he tried to help, but he didn't understand. Gran Torino beat the fundamentals into me, but even he couldn't grasp the self-destructive nature of it all. I was alone in it. He paused again, and a memory, unbidden and painfully sharp, bled through into Izuku's consciousness. It wasn't a flash of battle or death. It was quiet. Domestic. He was seeing through the future self's eyes. He was older, maybe 17, standing in the doorway of his mother's kitchen. This was after the Kamino incident, after All Might's retirement. His arms were scarred, relics of his earlier struggles. He had just come home for a weekend visit. Inko Midoriya was at the stove, her back to him. She was humming softly as she prepared a bubbling pot of katsudon. Izuku! You're home! She had said, turning around. Her smile was bright, but her eyes were filled with a terror she was trying desperately to hide. Every time she looked at him, she wasn't just seeing her son, she was seeing the boy who fought monsters, the boy who came home with new scars, the boy who was All Might's heir. I made your favorite. You need to eat. You're too thin. The katsudon had tasted like ashes in his mouth. Her love was still there, but it was now inextricably tangled with fear. His strength, the thing he was so proud of, was the very thing that was breaking his mother's heart. That was the day I truly understood, the ghost's voice whispered in his mind, the memory fading. The pain of my broken bones was nothing compared to the pain I saw in her eyes. I realized that getting stronger wasn't just about winning fights. It was about ending them quickly. Efficiently. So that the people I loved wouldn't have to live in constant fear. I mastered full call not for myself, but so my mother could one day look at me without seeing a ghost. The memory faded, but the emotion remained, a deep, soul-crushing sorrow. In my time, I failed. All for one used her to get to me. Her fear became a weapon against me. I mastered my power to stop hurting her, and in the end, my power is what led him to her doorstep. Izuku was silent, tears streaming down his face. He was crying for his mother, for the fear she would one day feel. He was crying for the broken man in his head, for the boy who had only wanted to make his mom proud. This wasn't a monster. This wasn't just a ruthless strategist. This was him, twisted and broken by a grief he couldn't even comprehend yet. We'll protect her, Izuku vowed, his voice thick but fierce. This time, we'll protect her. I promise. I know, Deku replied, his voice regaining a sliver of its usual firmness, grounded by the boy's resolve. That's why we're here. Now get up. The tide's coming in. A week later, All Might found him back at Dagoba. The change was staggering. Izuku was no longer standing still. He was moving along the shoreline in a controlled, steady jog. Encircling his body was a stable, vibrant aura of green lightning. It didn't spit or spark erratically. It flowed, a perfect, humming sheath of power that clung to his form. There was no sign of pain on his face, only deep concentration. Toshinori stood by the seawall, hidden in the evening shadows, and simply watched. He'd come because he was worried. The report from Aizawa about Midoriya's training had been alarming, hours of what looked like self-inflicted agony. He had come to offer his help, to try and bridge the strange new distance between them. But what he was seeing defied all his expectations. This wasn't the clumsy, bone-breaking application of power he was used to. This was full cowl. A perfect, stable, low-output full cowl. A technique that had taken Toshinori himself years to master after inheriting One for All, and one he had deemed far too advanced for his young successor. As Izuku jogged past, Toshinori stepped out from the shadows. Young Midoriya. Izuku stopped, the green aura vanishing without a single errant spark. He turned, not with a startled jump, but with a calm, fluid motion. He wasn't even breathing heavily. "All might," he said, his voice steady. He offered a small, respectful bow. "That was remarkable," Toshinori said, his voice filled with genuine awe. He walked closer, his eyes scanning Izuku's form, searching for any sign of injury, any telltale strain. There was none. "Full cowl. How? When did you?" "I've been practicing," Izuku said simply, the lie feeling more practiced now. "The echoes have been helpful. It's like having a blueprint in my head. I've just been trying to follow it." "Show him," Deku commanded. "But not too much. 8%. A practical, sustainable output. Show him control." Toshinori opened his mouth to offer his guidance, to share his own experiences with the technique. "My boy, you must be careful. The feedback loop can be dangerous. If you lose focus for even a second." "I know," Izuku interrupted gently. He took a steadying breath. "Like this?" He activated One for All. The green lightning flared to life, brighter this time, more intense. It wrapped around him, humming with a power that was no longer just a shimmer, but a palpable force. Veins of red energy pulsed within the green aura, a sign of the immense power being perfectly channeled. "This is 8%, Izuku stated, his voice perfectly calm. He took a step, and the sand barely shifted under his feet. He bounced lightly on the balls of his feet, the movement graceful and controlled. He looked at his mentor, his eyes clear and focused. "It feels stable." Toshinori was speechless. Pride swelled in his chest, so potent it almost made him dizzy. His boy. His successor was a prodigy, a genius of unprecedented scale. He was mastering in weeks what had taken others years. He was going to be the greatest hero the world had ever seen. But as the initial wave of pride receded, a colder, more somber feeling took its place. An unsettling melancholy. He had come here to teach. To be the mentor. To offer the wisdom of his experience. But there was nothing for him to teach. The boy in front of him was learning from a ghost, from an echo in the quirk that Toshinori himself had never heard. He was progressing at a rate that was not just incredible, but alien. He felt a chasm opening between them, wider than ever before. He had given Izuku the key to a legendary power, but a stranger was teaching him how to drive. He was becoming a bystander in his own legacy. He put on his best beaming smile, the one he always used when he was proud, but this time, it felt brittle. That's incredible, my boy. Absolutely incredible. You're a natural." Izuku offered a small, sad smile in return. He could feel his mentor's conflicting emotions. He had demonstrated his strength, but in doing so, he had proven how little he now needed the man standing before him. Toshinori clapped a hand on Izuku's shoulder, the gesture meant to be celebratory. "Keep up the good work, young Midoriya. You make me proud." But as he walked away, leaving the boy cloaked in his new, perfectly controlled power under the twilight sky, Toshinori Yagi felt a profound and startling sorrow. He was proud, yes, but he also felt like he was being replaced. And he was beginning to fear that in his desperate search for a successor, he had somehow lost his son.